Sangwai Krap. I hope my pronunciation is okay. Sorry, this is the only sentence I can say in Thai, but thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak here, and especially my big thanks to K-Bank for inviting me to join this important event. And I was really impressed by the discussions that I heard so far with so many innovative ideas on green sustainable finance. And I was actually spending a couple minutes second room here and seeing a lot of good products, good technologies are being promoted in Thailand on sustainability. And also big congratulations to K-Bank on leading the green finance innovation here. I heard from Ms. Katia that K-Bank is actually planning its transition targets for net zero and also improving disclosure in a very big way. So congratulations again. Now, in the coming maybe 15 minutes or so, I'm going to spend some time on the China experience of developing green finance, which is a process that I was deeply involved, as I was the chief economist in the Chinese Central Bank. And that was about 10 years ago. I was leading the drafting of the Chinese green finance policy framework. Then I switched to a couple of international issues, partly because I used to co-chair the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group. And also, I'm still leading a couple of international collaborative arrangements, including China-European-led Common Ground Taxonomy, and also the Capacity Building Alliance of Sustainable Investment, which is a global platform for training of sustainable finance specialists. Now, starting just a few words on how China started green finance, that was about 10 years ago. In fact, it has very little to do with the climate. You probably knew that China was very polluted in terms of air quality back 10 years ago. And a lot of Chinese, especially those in Beijing, were wearing masks back 2013, 2014, not because of COVID, but because of the air pollution. So at that time, I was a chief economist in the Chinese Central Bank, and we made a proposal to the central government saying that we need to raise money for you to invest in pollution control activities. And we understand that the government probably needs to mobilize something like 4 trillion RMB per year, but the government doesn't have money. It only has 10% of the funding that's required. And we, the financial sector, can help you to mobilize 90% of finance that's needed for pollution control prevention. So that was a very easy click between the finance sector's proposal on green and the central government need. Indeed, they need a lot of money. So very quickly, it turned into a mandate from the central government to the central bank, which I was working at that time, to lead the drafting of a green finance policy framework. And I spent roughly a year between 2015 and early 2016 on the drafting of this document. And by middle of 2016, China published the Green Finance Guideline, which I think is the world's first top-down policy framework, which consolidates taxonomy, disclosure requirement, financial products, and incentive into one big package. And now let me describe these 4 pillars in a little bit more detail. On taxonomy, we now have actually 3 sets of taxonomy in China. The earlier one, for example, I personally led the drafting of the Green Bond Taxonomy 2015. We now also have a taxonomy for green lending, and we have a taxonomy for green projects. But all of these are consistent to each other because they're based on the green project taxonomy. And going forward, I think we will be consolidating all these taxonomy into one piece, which will guide the different types of green financing products, including loans, bonds, and other type of green assets. And more recently, we're working on transition taxonomy. And I think Assistant Governor So Chin just mentioned you have a taxonomy which has different color, like traffic light system. But in China, we separate them. The green one is a green taxonomy. The transition one is a transition taxonomy, which covers the carbon-intensive sectors, such as coal-fired power generation, steel, cement, petrochemical, and so on how they should decarbonize. So these pathways are written into a transition taxonomy. The national ones were actually drafted already, and it's now being used on a pilot basis. And at the local government level, there are 20 plus regional governments have came up with a taxonomy on transition. So this is one set of important pillars for the green finance ecosystem. And the reason that we need taxonomy is we need to use that to prevent greenwashing, to officially define what is green. Otherwise, we'll end up with everybody claiming they are doing green, but with no basis. The second big pillar is disclosure. Starting more than 10 years ago, we began to introduce green loans and later on green bonds and so on. And we required all these issuers and the borrowers to disclose environmental information, meaning that if you reduce air pollution, water pollution, land contamination, tell me how much you have reduced. If you reduce carbon or save energy, tell me how much you have saved and how much you have reduced. This kind of information needs to be disclosed to the investors, to the capital markets, and also to the regulators. And now we are moving towards a ISSB-based system, which is the International Sustainability Standard Boards introduced a set of global benchmark, which China adopts, and it's published in the form of Ministry of Finance regulation for corporates to disclose not only the project level environmental information, but at the corporate level, including carbon emission, including transition plan, and climate risk analysis. The third pillar is incentive, which is, I think, very important, especially in developing countries, because a lot of green projects in the early days, they don't make enough profits. And therefore, it's very hard for them to crowd in private sector money. And in the very beginning, we thought it's needed in the China setting that the central bank, the fiscal authority, and other regulators and government agencies should help them to become more profitable so that they can mobilize the participation of private sector money. And just give you two examples of the type of incentive we introduced in China. One is at the central bank level, the People's Bank of China introduced the decarbonization facility, which is a central bank's relending facility that offers low-cost funding to qualify the green projects such as renewables. At that time, when it was introduced a few years ago, the funding cost was as low as 1.75%. And it was, I think, hopefully 200 basis points lower compared with the markets. And so that was a very important incentive for a lot of private sector activities to be involved in using green financing. And the second example is that in some local governments, they have the fiscal resources and they are keen in developing green finance. Then they use their local money to subsidize the interest payments of green loans. For example, in one of the green finance pilot city, Huzhou, they subsidize all the qualified green projects, which are in their database. And I think largely because of this incentive, the green loans in the city was able to grow more than 40% every year in the last 8 years. And it's now becoming, I think, the world's highest green loan ratio city, meaning the green loans in the city as a percentage of total outstanding loans is 34%, much higher than emerging market average of about 3% only. Now, the last pillar is the financial products. We have developed, as of now, the green loans, green bonds, green insurance, ETF products, and carbon finance products, and so on. The largest two product categories are the green loans and green bonds. As of now, China has developed the largest green lending market in the world with outstanding green loans at 40 trillion RMB, which is equivalent to about 5.5 trillion US dollar. And we also developed the largest green bond market. So these products are really fueled the massive growth of Chinese green economy. As some of the speakers mentioned, China was very competitive on renewable energy, EV, and so on. And indeed, with the support of green financing, we were able to create the largest renewable industry in the world. Chinese installation of solar wind is now 50% of global total. And they were able to create the largest EV industry in the world. The Chinese electric vehicle manufacturing is 60% of global total, and Chinese batteries is about 70% of global total. Behind that, it was a strong support from green financing. Now, just to switch to a few words on international cooperation, maybe 2 or 3 items, because there are too many things I was involved in the last 10 years, including through the G20, the IPSF, the CASI, and many others. So given the time limit, let me talk about the G20 initiative on transition finance. That was 2022, when I was still the co-chair of the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group. The group published the G20 Transition Finance Framework, which is an important document guiding a lot of jurisdictions' local implementation of transition finance. And within that framework, the G20 was asking the authority to clearly define what transition activities are, which could be in the form of taxonomy. So I think Thailand is now practicing that by putting them into Amber. And secondly, we need to make sure that transition companies will develop qualified science-based transition plan with targets consistent with Paris Agreement, and of course with your local targets for carbon neutrality. And thirdly, we need incentive to help lower the funding cost and enable them to attract more private sector money. And of course, they need to disclose with high transparency and also considering the just element of a transition, which means that a lot of transition projects tend to be associated with laying off workers, and to minimize the social impact, the transition company as well as the financiers for the transition need to take into account the social elements in the design of the transition process. The second example of international collaboration I'd like to mention is the common ground taxonomy. As a lot of countries, I think 70 plus countries are now developing the taxonomy, and we're facing the danger of too many countries developing different taxonomies without coordination, which means that if each country defines green in its own way, and they're not consistent across the jurisdictions, you may end up with market segmentation, which means that in our case, back 5 years ago, we had a problem of Chinese issuing Chinese green bond using Chinese standard, not able to sell the Chinese green bond in Europe because Europe doesn't recognize the Chinese green taxonomy as their taxonomy. So to overcome this problem, back 5 years ago, China initiated this idea of creating a common ground taxonomy together with Europe. And that was agreed by the European authority, and we created a IPSF taxonomy working group, which I personally co-chaired on behalf of China, and working together with Marcel Hug from EU. And 2 years after, this working group produced the common ground taxonomy, which is recognized both by China and EU. And this is called CGT for short, common ground taxonomy. And that contained 72 activities, which are largely mitigation-related activities, including solar, wind, biomass, water treatment, solid waste treatment, low carbon aviation, low carbon building, low carbon, shipping, and so on. And last year, Singapore joined. They thought it was a good idea for China, Europe to collaborate and promote cross-border green capital flows with lower cost, with the same sticker, namely the CGT as a label for the bonds. And Singapore said that we want to be part of this as well. So we created this multi-jurisdiction common ground taxonomy last year, which was published at a COP November last year. And now this common ground taxonomy is further expanding its jurisdiction basis, and we are looking to essentially invite more countries to join the CGT and to become members and owners of CGT. So going forward, I see the common ground taxonomy has a potential to become the basis for interoperability across different taxonomy in different countries, and thereby helping to lower the cost of a cross-border transaction. And finally, just a word on the capacity building alliance of sustainable investment, which my team launched back 1.5 years ago at the COP28. And this is a platform which is really in response to the G20 call for strengthening capacity building in developing country emerging market on green finance. And my team, which used to work for me and which in turn worked for the G20 for many years, we felt that we were in the right position to put together this platform. So at the time we launched, we had 42 organizations join the Capacity Building Alliance, and as of now, we have 67 global members. These are large banks, and large NGOs, United Nations initiatives, and so on, and they are joining hands to create the contents to disseminate in emerging market developing countries. I'm looking forward to actually more collaboration with Thailand colleagues, whether you're in the bank or NGOs or in banking associations. Hopefully you can, working with CASI to co-develop contents and disseminate these sustainable finance knowledge to your audience for the benefit of developing Thailand green financial system and of course for the benefit of the global climate agenda. I'm right on time. Thank you very much again for inviting me to join this conversation and I wish the conference a big success. Thank you.
กสิกรไทยบริการทุกระดับประทับใจ